So tell us a little about yourself, as in like where you're from, and then maybe where you reside right now. And then after that, maybe something interesting about yourself.
Sure. So I am Sudanese American. I was born in Sudan to parents who were born and raised in Sudan, but lived a very global international life as a child. My dad was a diplomat at the time of Sudan, placed in Sweden for about 6-7 years. I lived there. And then we went to Uganda, where I went to American International School for about a couple of years. And in between, we would be in Sudan. So at 7, I was in Sudan for about a year, and then again at 10 years old, before we immigrated to America upon the coup d'etat dictatorship of Bashir. So a very multicultural, third-cultured background where I was Sudanese and American, and really reconciling that as a child growing up.
Okay, so you talked a little bit about, you know, these diverse experiences that you had growing up, and this level of multiculturalism. So tell us what happened. What were some of maybe those kind of cultural or Black consciousness awakening experiences or experience that happened to you to get you to start thinking a little bit more deeper and critically about your Black identity?
Yeah. So what's interesting, in most folks who've grown up outside the world, outside of America, that are Black, especially as kids, it's not until you get to America that you realize you are this thing called Black. Because back home, you're Sudanese, or you're Nigerian, or you're whatever country, a tribe. And growing up in this multicultural bubble, entering in my childhood was spent in New York. I was in another multicultural bubble, happened to be in a neighborhood in Queens that was very diverse. And so I was quite unaware of the struggle and the history of Black America, related all the way from enslavement, segregation, Jim Crow. Obviously, it was touched upon in school, but really glossed over. Like the basics of Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, civil rights. The Civil War was fought enslaved people are free. But it was very much a life where I didn't see the day-to-day struggle. I started picking up, though, on nuances where I was maybe the one or two only people in a class that was an honors class, and eventually kind of picked up more nuances, I think, in the media and the news, recognizing that Africa and Blackness was this negative, this stigma, something to overcome, which I never felt, right? Like, I grew up with this idea of America being a land of opportunity and education. That's literally what was told to me by my parents. And so I'm accessing education and getting ahead and really moving along, and thinking that, well, as long as I, keep working hard, performing well, I'm going to get to ascend to whatever levels. And it was as I was approaching my professional life, I was able to get my degree in finance. In college, similar experiences where it was very multicultural. Again, maybe noticing I'm one or two of the only, but again, I'm achieving my opportunity. And it wasn't until I got into corporate America that the starkness was really apparent, especially at leadership level. And then you start recognizing that there is a perception of you because of this Black identity. And it's something to sort of be conscious about, right? The double consciousness comes in, and you start second guessing yourself and what you're perceived as, whether you're perceived as a leader. If you make a mistake, does that sort of like ruin it for you, for the rest of the Black folk in teams? Does that, mean you had to work double as hard? Like, I recognize now some of the microaggressions I was going through as an early professional that I didn't even realize were microaggressions. And now that is part of what I'm conscious of, and seeing that that's something we're all struggling with. I really felt alone at the time. I didn't realize I was internalizing this oppression, and that so many others of us were going through it too, in deeper ways than even what I was going through. Because again, I was still achieving enough success by the standards of America. But there's an imposter syndrome that you ultimately realize has a lot to do with you lacking self-knowledge. And that path opened up the door for me to get into this type of work eventually.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple things that was important. Two of which was, you talked about these microaggressions that you experienced, and you even talked about some of those things being manifested in a sense of loneliness, and then even this imposter syndrome. But talk a little bit more for, like, let's say someone is watching this, they've heard about what you do that we're going to talk about in a little bit, and they would imagine, really, you? Right? So accomplished and everything like that. So maybe, were there any specific experiences outside of maybe those feelings of loneliness, of microaggressions or what may have you, that really stood out in your mind that made you realize, okay, I am different?
Yeah. So, going back to what you said about someone like me, especially being a continental African, right? So I'm growing up in an African-centered home, but at the same time, I am shying away from that because I want to assimilate into being an American. And for me, it was also an Arab Muslim culture that I felt was oppressing me from things. Like, I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that, like my friends could. And America offers this sense of freedom and identity around individualism, and you can be anything you want to be. And so I want to be more of that. However, no matter how much you want to achieve that sense of freedom, you come to realize your Blackness is part of limiting you into just naturally relating and connecting with people who may be perceiving you in a certain way or grew up with a mentality around Black people. So a very specific example, and I'll kind of touch on two. One that's very like clear, apparent, something is off. Another was more sort of me trying to navigate my confidence and not necessarily realizing I lacked in it. So I worked in a very diverse department for 4 years at Goldman Sachs. So I got my finance degree, ended up interning and then getting a full-time offer. Again, the ideal setup, success, post-graduation. I transitioned into a more front office position, and there I had more white colleagues. And in particular, there was a lot of female colleagues on my particular team. And these group of white young women were going to lunch practically every day together. And I figured I'd be invited to, at some point as the new team member and kind of just welcoming me in. And I just love to socialize and connect with my team in general. It wasn't happening. And slowly but surely, you kind of pick up like, oh, okay, they're not trying to be inclusive. And I didn't realize how much agency I had to manage my career because I was just looking to take advantage of opportunities that were given to me. Had I recognized that I could interview managers as I was looking to transfer divisions, that would have given me the ability to assess for the management style, the team that I felt would be a better fit. And so lacking the understanding that I could speak to mentors about this, speak up that, what I'm looking for and what opportunities I feel are best for me would be possible. That came from the internalized oppression and just wanting to, not rock the boat. And those are the kinds of understandings that I now have that we embed into the Birthright Africa program, in addition to the cultural connections we make to feel the pride and confidence in ourselves. It's also understanding how to fulfill on our highest aspirations by accessing opportunities and networks that we really want to focus on.
Okay. So just backing up a little bit, right? You've had some of these negative experiences in corporate America, and I think what's important that you mentioned is sometimes when we think of the way that racism impacts us, we think of an explicit, violent way that it happens, right? Like, you know, maybe some of the things that we've seen, unfortunately, on the news and what may have you. But oftentimes it's quiet, it's implicit, right? It's systemic, and we can't feel the sting of it, you know, as much as something that is a little bit more explicit. So out of that comes this amazing organization, right? Founded in 2015, and you're helping young folks of African descent between ages of 13 and 30 to explore their cultural roots and really help them become more of global citizens by appreciating and affirming their African identity and ancestry.
Exactly.
So talk to us a little bit about Birthright Africa and some of those key motivations that said, I have to do this.
Yeah. So it's interesting that I was exposed to the concept of connecting to cultural heritage through two friends of Jewish descent that were getting their birthright Israel at the time that I'm working at Goldman Sachs, and I'm going through my own identity reconciliation, which I had been going through since teenage years. And part of it was learning about these friends that were getting this free 10-day trip to study history and culture. At the same time that I'm recognizing I don't know my history and have been shying away from African Sudanese culture. And so together, once I kind of understood the concept, I was like, why isn't this happening for Black people? We need a Birthright Africa. I need this. And if I need this, a whole bunch of us must need this. And I felt like I had enough of the passion and understanding culturally the nuances of what it means to lack that sense of pride and confidence in yourself, even though you may academically achieve and find yourself in positions of success. There's still going to be some of these hangups that when a microaggression or those lesser implicit biases occur could still keep you off your track. And so I just said, I have to be a part of this. If someone's already started it, looked it up, no one had started, registered the website, and built my career in education, because then I recognized a passion in education and had enough of the self-belief that with a business background, a passion in education, went and got my MBA, that I would be able to really create an organization that could drive the entire culture to be a part of this movement of connecting the diaspora, building the bridge, because there is a power in understanding self, in building that knowledge that ultimately tells you you can be anything you want to be. Our tagline is Discover Roots, Uncover Greatness, because we have not been taught the history. And if we are taught, it's very much focused on a deficit around enslavement and colonization. And so you're walking around with this deficit mindset, not knowing we've had leaders, entrepreneurs, inventors, since the beginning of time. You know, your Madam C.J. Walkers and Garrett Morgans that I never learned about. Just started hearing about at 25. I'm working on Wall Street, not realizing the African burial ground was discovered in 1991 in New York. And there were enslaved Africans in New York that paved the way for what Wall Street has become. Had I known that at the time working there, I would have felt like I belonged and no one could tell me otherwise. So there's a sense of connecting the history to the present that then really empowers you and inspires you to believe that you can achieve whatever your aspiration is in the future. And so we built a program around this mission to inspire youth and young adults of African descent to explore their cultural roots and legacy of innovation. We essentially have a collaborative partnership model. Birthright Africa is the umbrella organization partnering with high schools, colleges, community-based organizations who have the youth and young adults of African descent, ages 13 to 30, that we're looking to bring this impact to, helping them build out their own individual birthright programs in-house, leveraging our technical expertise. And we look to support the funding of this work, because that is the hardest task of this impact. And we to date have helped send 61 scholars with 6 partners, including our first partner at the City University of New York through their Black Male Initiative. Now we're talking to individual City University of New York CUNY schools to have each of the 30 campuses that make up the entire university consider a program, while we're also speaking to high school partners, community-based partners. And ultimately, it's about transforming the entire culture and having every young person know that this is an opportunity waiting for them. We at Birthright Africa are committed that every youth and young adult of African descent gets a free educational trip to Africa. It actually begins local and national with exploration in the United States, because many of us don't even know our history and our cultural sites and the leaders and entrepreneurs right in our own neighborhoods. And that is empowering for when you return after, and you can continue to build access and networks in this birthright ecosystem that wherever you choose to be in the world, you know you have a tribe, a community that will support you in your future endeavors.